implementation is imminent because there are some timeframes that have been set for the trading to start happening in the AfCFTA market. As you recall, the AfCFTA is not just a trade liberalization agenda for the African Union. It is much more than that. I think there are a lot of aspirations that go with it, including deepening regional integration as a vehicle for creating connections between Africans, trading together, boosting intra-African trade, and enhancing industrialization and competitiveness, inclusive growth and development, gender equality. Yes, the agreement also has that as an important objective, which stands out as being quite unique, as well as, of course, the desire for jobs to be created and for sustainable development for the continent. So I think you know already the broad scope of this agreement, that it's also not just trade in goods, it's services, and progressively it will include a number of interesting areas that are new for the African continent in terms of negotiations, such as intellectual property rights, competition policy, which where there's been significant work done, but at a continental level, this will be new, investment policy, and last but not least, e-commerce, which is the newest addition, which has come on board since the summit to this year. So understanding the scope and ambition, what we are really hoping this afternoon will do with the assistance of the distinguished panel is to unpack some of those issues and give them a feeling of, give life to them, to understand really what are their expectations and aspirations, and once, if we succeed to achieve this agreement in its full scope. But even as we start, what are the perceptions that are out there? So what I want to do now briefly is just to welcome individually each panelist that has joined us. I know that we have one panel member that will join us, and I will introduce him when he's here with us. And I'll just go sequentially. We have Ms. Valentina Mintah. Welcome, Ms. Mintah. We're very excited that you're here. She is a Ghanaian British technology executive, was internationally recognized, and has been very much involved with trade facilitation and process automation issues on the continent, and has actually been engaged in West Africa, specifically Nigeria and Ghana, where she has implemented significant projects that have resulted in multi-million-dollar savings. And so we want to basically thank you for joining us today, and we are looking forward to your contributions. We have also with us Ms. Monica Musonda, who is, has a background in corporate law, but now is working as a corporate governance expert turned entrepreneur, and working on a business called Java Foods as the CEO and founder, and is working in the agricultural food processing sector. And my understanding, also looking at this market that's unfolding and wanting to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming. So we are looking forward to get also your deep knowledge and experience, Ms. Musonda, in our discussions today. And I just want to thank you for being with us and to share your perspectives. We have also with us Mr. Ahmed Bennis, who is the Secretary General for the Africa Economic Zones organization, and also the Group Business Development Director for the Tangier Med Group, which I understand is a very important stakeholder in terms of the continent's investment, and also industrialization and processing and value addition, doing a lot of great work. We want to learn more about your perspectives on the AfCFTA, because you have a constituency, I think, that is active, and we would want to appreciate how you're seeing the partnerships also that are being forged between the public and private sectors. So the last participant, perhaps if I may introduce him, I'm hoping that he'll be with us very shortly, Mr. Victor Lima, who is coming from Liman, who is coming from Nigeria as the acting chief negotiator and also the director general for the Nigerian Trade Negotiations Organization. He has been, again, has a number of academic attributes and has been working actively on the negotiations that we're talking about. So as one of the architects, if you like, of this process, where I think he will also bring some very interesting perspectives from his technical and also his own knowledge of the processes as they are unfolding, not only in West Africa, but across the continent. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to basically now get straight into the discussion, because we're here today to really learn more from this distinguished panel. And perhaps before we go into the discussions, allow them to basically share with us briefly about themselves, their organizations, and more importantly, why they're here. What is it that is exciting them to be a part of the panel session this afternoon? So maybe I can ask Ms. Valentina if you can start, and then we can move on to the next presenters.
Okay. Thank you, Treasure, and thank you, Tralac, for having me, and good day to all our participants. For today's session, I'll be wearing 3 hats. Treasure mentioned a bit about my background in trade facilitation, but for this session, I'll wear the 3 hats of a technology executive, a trade facilitation practitioner, and an executive board member of the International Chamber of Commerce that represents 45 million businesses in Africa as well as globally. Now, the business community trading in Africa and with Africa really look forward to realizing the immense gains of the successful implementation of the AfCFTA. Whereas the implementation is led by governments, states, and institutions, the users and beneficiaries largely remain the business community and the citizenry. True collaboration with business is needed from the onset through to the post-implementation. This is to ensure that the outcome is fit for purpose, fit for government, fit for countries, as well as fit for businesses, and that rapid gains are also made. Now, what does this mean to the business community? In practical sense, business in this context is looking for predictability and also transparency of processes and rules. Service level agreements and rules need to be set, published, so that they're widely available to all, and most importantly, enforced and adhered to. Businesses are also looking at harmonization of regulatory requirements and customs controls. This is not only within country agencies, but also with country counterparts. Example, the Foods and Drugs Authorities, the Standards Authority, phytosanitary, etc. Business is also looking at harmonization of documents and data sets. And this is where the WCO data model plays a very key role. So there should be only one definition and one view of a data element that is shared by all those who need the data for processing, to avoid the timely cost of doing business by multiple data and forms being pushed across. Businesses are also looking for the harmonization of legal frameworks, example like electronic signatures, e-commerce legislation, etc. Now, even more critical since COVID, interoperability is a big issue. How do we ensure that there's interoperability of digital systems so that systems are not working in silos and that handshakes exist to exchange timely data between systems? And this should be not only within the countries, but with the countries in the region and with global business partners. Now, during the previous sessions, it was mentioned that e-commerce has now been pushed into phase 2 of implementation. But in light of COVID, we all now know that paperless is not just lip service, and paperless is not a nice to have, but paperless is critical. And we hope that not just e-commerce, which is electronic business, but digitization and technology in general will be brought to the fore of the arrangements. Another critical area the business is looking for is non-discriminatory practices. At ICC, our mission is to make business work for everyone, every day, and everywhere. So business is looking forward to measures that will support and embrace, particularly in Africa, our informal sector that's aspiring to the formal and the already established formal sectors. Also the micro and SMEs, as well as multinational companies. AfCFTA is focusing on gender balance. So women in trade is also a priority, as women contribute significantly to the African economy. Now, on behalf of ICC, I want to state that ICC is fully committed to supporting the implementation of the AfCFTA. And in a recent meeting of the Secretary Generals, SG John Denton and SG Wamkele Mene discussed, amongst others, ICC's aggressive Save Our SME campaign, as well as the Digital Trade Standards Initiative. And we look forward to further such engagements with business and implementers of the AfCFTA to ensure that ultimately the efficient movement of goods are aligned with the physical movement of documents, the movement of people, and to an extent, the movement of investments across the continent, and also with global trading partners. I look forward to this exciting panel discussion and to sharing some ideas, and also the question and answer session. Thank you very much, and over to you, Treasure.
Thank you very much for, I think, a very good context setting in terms of your perspectives that you're bringing, Valentina. Thank you very much for that. I would like to ask Monica Musonda, please, if you could come in and also just briefly introduce yourself and your what this session means for you and your stakeholders or organization that you represent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. As I have been introduced, I am the CEO and founder of Java Foods. We're based in Lusaka, Zambia, and we are essentially an agro-processing business with a vision of manufacturing nutritious foods made from locally sourced raw materials. I started this business in 2012, and actually I'm really grateful to be a part of this session, because one key thing about where we are now is that, of course, we want to see AfCFTA come into operation, but we want to see much more business relevant rules which are transparent and actually work. So really happy to actually lend my voice to this discussion as a small business, run and founded by a woman, and also in the agricultural space and food space, which is actually gaining a lot of prominence right now. So if you allow me just to take a step back to just describe the business I'm in and some of the challenges we have been facing around regional trade and around really scaling up businesses. I think when I first started the business, I looked at a few key things. I looked at Zambia being really in the center in Southern Africa, which has many borders. We actually border 9 countries. And therefore, I looked in my business plan at not just a one country play. I was actually looking at over 350 million mouths to feed, because I was looking very much at an export market, really looking to take advantage of what we call as Southern Africa's breadbasket, which is Zambia, and producing the food here competitively and being able to sell the food across the borders. I was also very keen to see that, the demographics of Southern Africa is very similar. We're a very young population, which means we are able to be creative and innovative about the food that we're able to prepare. And also I was very keen to create an African brand. We then went on to actually produce a product, which is a leading product. It's called Easy Instant Noodles. It is the leading instant noodle brand here in Zambia, and now we do fortified cereals. And again, all on the back of the fact that our market was not just going to be Zambia. So quickly did we learn that actually, as much as our vision was a Southern African play, we realized the complexities of trying to export into a country like Malawi, which is right next door, very similar to Zambia, or Zimbabwe. The mountains of paperwork, the costs of actually getting some advice from local consultants to actually just tell you what documentation did you need, what did you need to supply, because remember we were exporting food, so there is a lot of health paperwork that you need, but we could not get a clear answer. Did we need to sign Form A? Did we need to get it certified? Did I need to use the Malawian Bureau of Standards to certify the product? How much was that? And there was just no information which we could rely on and really respect in order to go ahead. So there, very quickly we decided maybe we should retreat and then look at markets where we found it was a little bit more transparent. So I can tell you now, for instance, we are not in DRC because we found that that was much more complicated. And now we are working much more closely with partners in Zimbabwe and Botswana because we found that it was a lot easier to get the information. But what a shame for businesses such as myself, which need to scale, which have to scale in order to survive, but were unable to do so because it was really expensive to export, although the benefits are clear when you export, but expensive to find information, expensive to get the product across the border and be able to sell to a different market. Secondly, I think for us, we felt that there was a clear lack of harmonization in standards. We found in every country there's a new set of standards, there's a new set of simple things like labeling. Can you just use the word oil? Do you have to use vegetable oil? Do you have to be more specific and say soya? You know, things like that. Every country had different regulation, which made things so much more complicated. And remember, you're talking about an SME who has limited access to finance. So lo and behold, this year we're hit with COVID, an even bigger nightmare for not just the Zambian market, but the Southern African market. You have all seen the fact that food prices have skyrocketed merely because of depreciation in currencies. A lot of food is actually imported into the region. Therefore, without actually having a discussion on this, we actually need to really push much more local production of food processes and export in the region. I mean, the argument now holds so much more true. And therefore, this is so important to have these sorts of discussions to see how we can now really scale businesses, how we can deal with some of the problems around regional trade, how we can also discuss things like removal of non-tariff barriers. The first bit of my discussion was discussion about tariff barriers, but we'll be very keen to really understand how we're going to practically get rid of non-tariff barriers, how we can also encourage better trade facilitation, because, you know, we need to know who the strong partners are in these countries, how we can collaborate on, perhaps we shouldn't be manufacturing certain things if other countries can do better at more competitive costs. We need to be speaking about standards. I think they are global standards for food, but how can we now make sure that the region and continent actually is working off a set of standards? So for me, my expectation for this discussion, and lots of people who are like me, who are SMEs, who are trying to scale, who are trying to understand better how this new arrangement would help us grow, find new markets at a more competitive rate. So I really welcome being a part of it. It's just that I wanted to really share the practical aspects. It's all well and good to have shiny new treaties signed in Parliament, but if they're not business effective or business relevant, we will not achieve what we want in the period of time that we want. So thank you very much. Those are my opening remarks. I look forward to having a really great discussion.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Monica Musonda, for sharing your story and the perspectives and the challenges that you are experiencing as a small and medium-sized enterprise in the African market. I would like to now give the opportunity to Mr. Ahmed Bennis to also make his brief introductory remarks and just give us a sense of his own context and expectations from this afternoon's discussion.
Thank you, Trudy. Thank you, Treasurer, and thanks to the organization team of the Trade Law Centers, and also the distinguished panelists that are sharing this outstanding webinar session. I'm also having 3 hats. So I'm the Secretary General of Africa Economic Zones Organization, which is a continental organization leading public and private institutions in charge of the development and management, promotion of economic zones in Africa. This organization was founded in November 2015 and is counting today about 80 members representing 45 African countries. I'm also the Secretary General of African Port Task Force, and I'm the Group Business Development Directors of Tangermed Group. Tangermed is the leading port complex in Africa, and also among the top 50 ports around. We are ranked 35 globally, and we are also an economic zones developers, and we are ranked among the top 5 worldwide. And all this setup has been developed to share the expertise within the African continent. So in my capacity of Secretary General of the Africa Economic Zones Organizations, I'm very happy and delighted to share with you our view and our perspective with regards to the developments of the CFTA, which is today a remarkable achievement. So uplifting the regional trade integrations, enhancing competitiveness, improving the business climate, supporting, of course, the job creations, promoting greater investment, industrialization, diversification, and of course, with the main objective of developing regional and continental global value chain. And this is exactly what economic zones are targeting as well. So we are having the same objective as the Continental Free Trade Agreement. But a few words about the development of the economic zones in the continent that were adopted relatively late in Africa. And most African countries did not execute their project till late 90s. And as of today, there are more than 189 operating economic zones within the continent, and 57 projects that have been announced for completions. But since its inception, the economic zones have given a significant boost to FDI flows, creating an attractive investment conditions, supporting job creations. And over the past 5 years, more than 60 million jobs have been created in agro-processing, industrial fields, and services. And the economic zones are also an attractive instrument to promote quality foreign direct investments. And companies operating within the economic zones could be rather domestic, foreign-owned joint ventures, private and also public. But most of them have led to export diversification, promoting the regional trade and stimulating industrial spillover effect and clustering. So the economic zones are also the expression of the implementation of new industrial policy. And this has been used by, let's say, African state member to rebalance imports and exports activity toward growth and based on serving the domestic market and also the regional demand. So having said that, the economic zones is one of the main devices to advance the objective of the CFTA in driving a sustainable economic growth, job creation, investment promotion, trade liberalization, and regional integrations. And furthermore, most of economic zones in the continent have also implemented regulations that promote gender equality, capacity building, transfer of expertise, training facilities, and so on. So in this view, the CFTA focus also on the economic zones as part of these strategic instruments that would accelerate Africa's industrializations and will create employment and economic diversification while leaving none behind. So I'm very keen to hear from the other panelists and from the different points of view, and maybe share more details later on about our expectations And how do you foresee the implementation of this continental free trade agreement?
Thank you very much for that comprehensive introduction, and also giving us a sense of your constituency and the scale of the interventions that are already taking place, and the link also to the AfCFTA market. We'll come back to this later in our conversation. I think for now, I would want to just go straight into this question about impact and results. So much has been invested and is still being invested in this process. So I think when we really sit back and look at the issue of outcomes, expectations, I would like to ask, perhaps Valentina, you could lead us on some thoughts in this area. What exactly are the critical success factors that we could achieve through implementation? I know that in your opening remarks, you touched on several dimensions, but I just thought I'd come back to you so that you could give us a synopsis, just as a brief, summary, because unfortunately we don't have a lot of time, but I really want us to drill down to what performance measurements might look like for the AfCFTA. So if I may hand over to you to take us through that.
Okay, thank you, Treasure. I'll just share my screen now, and I have a slide which will illustrate my points. Please bear with me.
Take your time, it's okay.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned in my earlier submission, success will have a different look for every stakeholder. So you'd have governments who might be looking at effective revenue collection, and then of course from a business perspective. And just before we joined the main panel, we were all joking about how conference platforms are rapidly changing, particularly the Zooms of this world. And without tech support, we're all adopting and pushing forward with new changes that are coming. And that's one thing that's that's the only thing I would say thanks to COVID, that the adoption of technology is we're all fast embracing that. And therefore it's really key that technology forms the very bedrock of everything that's happening, how we share data, how we collaborate, how document is managed. And we hope that the AfCFTA would actually take into this to bear and ensure that it underpins everything that we do. Also, Professor Erasmus mentioned earlier that the RECs, the regional economic communities, will actually be maintained during the implementation, which is good because there's a lot of learning to be done from the work that has been done. If you look at the statistics, there's quite a lot of intra-African trade between countries within the RECs, and therefore there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Now, how are we going to achieve success? And it's really important that from the onset, we all know what success is going to look like and what these critical success factors are. Let's take political will. This is really needed at the national levels. And why is this needed? This is needed particularly in the area for the movement of people. We need leadership to be able to articulate to the entire nation what AfCFTA is about and what's in it for everyone, from businesses right down to the citizens, so that when we see movement of people that we're not used to seeing in our environments, it doesn't spark any tribal issues or any xenophobia that we can experience if this is not managed from day one. Therefore, leadership to drive the vision across all layers of society, as well as institutionalizing all the aspects of implementation at the national level and enacting the relevant national laws to ensure that there is a cohesive approach from the national levels that goes up so that we have a bottom-up approach that meets up the policy element coming from the Secretariat. Another aspect is people. Now, we can't achieve all these gains without people operating the systems, operating the institutions, as well as people using and benefiting from it. Therefore, awareness and change management is really important, training and capacity building, and accountability. We cannot have one official of an institution who can just stop the flow of goods or the movement of goods and actually erode all the gains made in the supply chain preceding his particular process. There needs to be public collaboration with people in country and also in the regions and continentally, as well as private and public-private partnerships. And sound governance structures to ensure that post-implementation, we can actually monitor and evaluate the impact and also change course if we need to ensure that we achieve the ultimate aim of the AfCFTA. Monica shared with us some of the processes or the cumbersome processes that businesses face on a daily basis. It is critical that these are simplified and harmonized to ensure that workflows are integrated within systems, across agencies, and across countries. If labels are to be of a certain standard in one country or within a region, or indeed, if there are global standards like ISO or standardized processes, then let us look at the business community and ensure that these actually work and are simplified so that if you're an agro-processor, you can focus your finite resources on processing and not getting a PhD in how to process documents in a supply chain. And also the publication of these procedures and processes. They shouldn't be hiding in the pockets in tattered printed documents in one official's desk or in one official's pocket. How can we ensure that information is available to all so that sound business decisions can be made? And processes automated. And I think once again, as I mentioned, thanks to COVID, we're all adopting technological changes, and automation of processes should be easy to achieve because the technology platforms exist. And with the political will and the capable people, automation of processes, once simplified, should be easy to achieve. And then platforms. How do we ensure that we have not just technology platforms, but infrastructural platforms? So how do we ensure that through the AfCFTA, there's sound and scalable technology platforms that exist in the trade supply chain, both in the country, regionally, continentally, as well as globally, so that information can be exchanged with global partners and exporting or importing partners. How do we ensure that they are capable of robust and interconnected transport modes, that is air, road, and sea? How do we ensure that we don't have eroded roads or pothole infested roads that would actually stifle the movement of goods after achieving very sophisticated technology platforms and sophisticated systems? However, the actual physical movement of the goods become impeded because we just don't have the right connectivity or the right connection of transport modes, or indeed potholed roads, which will impede the flow of goods. Looking at physical infrastructure, are ports sound to ensure that container movement can be easily achieved, as well as other physical structures and telecommunications and network structures to ensure that the gains of technology can be realized. So this is really critical because usually when we speak, we talk about policy, we talk about high level, but when it comes to the ground, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is actually meeting up with the policy statements and the vision. And that on the road, if someone is moving tomatoes or someone's moving noodles from one country to the other, that it can be made as easy and as painless as possible to ensure that trade can progress, which ultimately benefits the economic growth of countries and the region as a whole. And then we need to ensure that the policy framework is sound and harmonized across the region. And not only policy statements or the legal framework being in place, but that there are incentives and penal measures that are enforced should people go foul of these policy statements. And then finally, I would say collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And this has to happen from the onset through implementation to post-implementation, so that at the end of it, we can all recognize the success factors, be it government, be it regional, or be it business. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing this perspective and this framework. And I'll be very curious to hear how other panelists feel about some of the points that you've made. And I think that it is very interesting that you end on the note of collaboration, 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 because I think there is a lot I think we can learn from each other as stakeholders working on implementation. Very clearly, you've highlighted a number of them: regional economic communities, continental organizations, private sector of different size, and small and large. And so, yes, indeed, I appreciate very much what you're bringing, but I'd like our other panelists to comment, because I think they would perhaps have their own take as well on what needs to be done for us to see the success that we have defined for ourselves. So, Ms. Monica, maybe I can ask you, Ms. Monica Musonda, sorry, please can I ask you to step in? You have already sketched for us very eloquently the challenges. And I would like you to tell us, you see the AfCFTA as bringing some answers, or whether you have some questions still about whether the AfCFTA will really deliver what the MSME sector is looking at, what the women-owned businesses are looking at, basically what one might term the African private sector. So what are the expectations that you want to see fulfilled? And please come back and just give us some more insights on what you had already started to share.
Yes. So thanks very much. I think what is key, actually, what we're seeing, and I think everyone must recognize this, that for many businesses on the continent, many of them are actually SMEs. So sometimes access to information is difficult. It's not as easy as people think to walk into a Ministry of Commerce and say, I want to formally take my goods to another country. What do I need to do? And actually, most of the times it's quite costly. So you do see a lot of informal trade across into other countries. But the only problem with that is it doesn't really help on a sustainable basis. I think what this period is, the past 2 years, is bringing a renewed sense of momentum. I think for us here in Zambia, we're looking forward and really engaging our policymakers as well as our business associations, because we want to use this as an opportunity to grow. We realize that focus on one market. Zambia is a very small market. It has almost 18 million people. We realize that growth cannot come by focusing on one market. So we're really looking, and we're really hoping we can somewhat still contribute to really having more effective rules. And as I talked about when I began, some of the challenges we have experienced. I think I saw one of the questions about, are there no online portals? And actually what we have seen in the past, I would say last 6 to 8 months, is a lot more of our ministries being more organized and putting information up on online portals, but still, there's still more work to be done. It's all well and good to have it on an online portal and then go to the border, and the person at the border doesn't really understand that you need the Form M or you don't need the Form M. So we really still need quite a lot of work on educating our administrative officers, our civil servants, the key actors and players, in order for the implementation to go smoothly. But another issue I was really keen to talk about was this aspect of trade facilitation. You know, sometimes it's easier said than done to find key, trustworthy, experienced partners. And we are really hoping to see that through the engagement of countries as well as private sector organizations, we're able to see linkages. We're able to see things like the supply of raw materials, which this year has been really severely disrupted because of COVID and lockdown, that, you know, you've really had to look internally, look next door to see, can I get packaging from a different country? If I have to wait 3 months to get packaging from China, would it not make sense to contact someone in Tanzania who has a similar quality? But how do I find this information? So for me, all these things are very important. It's not just selling the product, but it's also trying to create products which can be competitive by using as much as possible products which can be sourced within the region, really creating linkages and stronger supply chains, which we're not at the moment doing very well. So if you ask many of the manufacturers here in Zambia, their key trading partners, if it's not China or India, would be South Africa, and very unlikely would it be a country closer by for various reasons. But I think those are the things we would like to continue to see. I've spoken about harmonization of documentation and better cooperation with customs. But an interesting one, and maybe I don't have the answer for this, but maybe I can throw it out to my other panel members. For us in Zambia, there's a discussion about infant industries. We don't have a very big manufacturing sector. So I've been in the sector this is now 7 years. You look at other countries, they're much stronger manufacturing businesses. And the question then comes, what happens to us who are growing? Are we protected? Is this what we're expecting to see from this new AfCFTA? Or actually, we're not really expecting to see the protection of infant industries, and that we must seek other industries to be much more competitive in. I hope I've answered your questions, and of course, and raised some other issues as well. But I think for us, those are some of the things on a real practical basis we want to see. And Valentina actually raised a number of issues about, making sure things are harmonized. I mean, how do we get paid is also a really big issue. You can imagine for us dealing with businesses in Zimbabwe. How can we guarantee that we will get paid when we supply goods? And we're hoping that those are sort of issues which will continue to be addressed as we go on. We could go on and on. I think those are some of my issues, yeah.
No, thank you very much. I think I definitely feel your passion and, on the topics that we're discussing. And as you were raising a number of points about the extent to which governments are able to respond and provide the information, and also other actors as well to provide solutions. I think there's also a challenge just in terms of information sharing. I'm aware of innovations. For example, the AU Trade Group that I'm involved with is rolling out an African e-commerce platform. It was launched by the AU on the 7th of July, but not everybody knows about it. So I think there's a lot more effort that needs to go out there to say what are the potential solutions so that MSMEs can look at them and see whether they meet their expectations. So this is what I'm taking away, that, definitely trade facilitation, information, these are key questions. And I will leave it for the other panelists who want to come in and talk about the infant industries point that you have raised. But I'd like to bring my brother Ahmed Bennis in, because I think he shared with us when we were in the panel that he's very happy to be in a panel with women. He doesn't feel at all intimidated. So please, my brother, come in and share with us what is, in this conversation, how do you feel as the special economic zones? What do you see as opportunities and challenges in the AfCFTA being implemented that we're talking about? Please come in.
All right, thank you, Trezor. And of course, I'm just lucky to be encountered with such beautiful ladies, and it's a great honor for us to be among this distinguished panelists. From our perspective, being driving the development of special economic zones, we have a very close relationship with the private sectors and with the investors, with the industrial company that are looking to develop themselves in Africa, considering the African continent as a market, but also opportunity to export. And the Continental Free Trade Agreements forecast a boost of 50% of intra-Africa trade. And also a welfare gains close up to $60 billion US. This covers several areas of interest of the economic zones operators. It's mainly the duty-free treatment of goods, the rules of origins, the customs cooperations, trade facilitations that you truly mentioned, the non-tariff barriers, the legal framework harmonizations, and this is very key, and of course the compliance with international standards. So hence, the Continental Free Trade Agreement is also a business opportunity for expanding the economic zones activities, promoting the intra-African trade and industrializations. And we, as African economic zones leader, can use this opportunity to trigger economic policy reform, focusing on accelerating diversification at the productions and also at the export level. So, and also on the other side, we need to mobilize investments. So a large market of 1.3 billion people requires also equally large scale of investments. And this leads to mobilize partners with the message that Africa is the next growth frontier, which is the case, with the young populations and an integrating market offering high rates of return with reasonable risk. So this is the message or our message to investors who are keen to develop their activities in our continent. And we foresee many interests coming from different continents, Europe, US, and of course, Asia. As far as we are concerned, our organizations is also involved in the ongoing CFTA negotiations, focusing on the development of the regulation that facilitates the intra-African trade for the product within originated from the special economic zones, and there is an issue. So we are expecting from the African member state to put resources together to take advantage of the economies of scale factors and the comparative advantages when designing special economic zones. So the goods and services that are produced within the economic zones are entitled to the CFTA rules of origin. But this has been a matter of concern because it has also been suspected for unfair competition. As it is said that the goods produced in the SEZ benefit from tax and other investment incentives, lowering their cost of production and manufacturing. So, therefore, such goods can be sold at a lower price than goods not manufactured in the SEZ. So, excluding the SEZ from the CFTA can have an undesirable effect because, first of all, the SEZ or the economic zones evolves nowadays, and many firms called export processing firms can benefit also from the incentive offered in the zones without being physically fenced inside the economic zones. And this makes the task of determining whether the SEZ and the identified firms that receive benefits are usually associated with SEZ, and this becomes more difficult. Secondly, excluding goods produced in the SEZ would reduce the effectiveness and the efficiency of the Continental Free Agreement, as it may exclude seizable shares of the intra-African trade from the scope of the CFTA. And of course, third, the tax incentive provided to firms established in the economic zones may not necessarily allow them to reduce costs of productions, and therefore the unfair competition is not demonstrated. So having said that, some African member states still nurture hostile sentiment towards firms established in SEZ, since they are not perceived as being African or truly Africans, because most of them are foreigners, and thus they do not particularly benefit from the local economy with backward linkage. So therefore, they consider that they should not benefit from the CFTA. However, the regional economic communities, such as the COMESA, the Eastern African communities, and others, so are all treat goods from the SEZ are originated, with the exception of the ECOWAS that still don't consider that. The same with the economic partnership with Europe, and also the AGOA, that has no explicit provision for the product originating from SEZ. So this is really a tricky point for us, because it would be detrimental to the CFTA objective to exclude goods manufactured in SEZ. And because of these limitations, the product manufactured in an SEZ located in a CFTA and will receive a preferential tariff treatment when exporting to the EU, to Europe or to the US, while the same product would not be entitled to be sold within Africa with the tariff treatment. So it's somehow, it becomes an unfair situation. So the CFTA member states are concerned about this unfair competitions with regards to the subsidies that are provided to economic zones, but it's more appropriate to address this somehow unfair competition with the purpose-built instruments such as the WTO agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. And also the Article 2 of the CFTA, if I remember well, it's Appendix 9, that refers to trade remedies, make also an explicit reference to the WTO agreement. So this may also be further considered and studied how other free trade agreements have dealt with the WTO treatment, such as what happens in Europe or in other regions. So the special economic zones within the CFTA.
I'm going to ask you to please summarize your points. Thank you. Just in the interest of time, because I want to continue the discussion.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have only one idea that I wanted to share with you, because it's the last one. So we are confident that the economic zones today can help rethinking the economic model to be developed in the continent. So we should rely on our resources to generate internal growth, transform our raw materials, produce locally, and develop a regional value chain complementarity between countries. And under the post-COVID-19 area, the economic zones have the potential of tapping into logistic activities, warehousing, to create competitive trading infrastructure and harnessing a single window clearance to facilitate efficient movement of goods across the continent. And our input in this direction is to lobby government to build secure and well-placed physical infrastructures, including road infrastructures, rail, energy, ports, telecommunications, that could open new markets across Africa. And we are entitled to develop new processes for the supply chain, supporting the vision of creating the one African market under the CFTA agreement.
Well, thank you very much for sharing, I think, and basically an elaborate presentation of some of the critical issues that are still there in the aspects that are yet to be concluded, such as rules of origin. But I think what brings a question to my mind, and perhaps it's been somehow alluded to in other presentations, is what are the risks or challenges of a member states-driven process where perhaps stakeholders don't feel they have a space to engage with the negotiation process itself. I think member states have, I think, been consulting with different stakeholders at the national level, regional level, and to some extent at the continental level. But the question that I would love to put out there is, do stakeholders feel it's adequate? Is it enough? Do you feel that your voice is heard? Is there enough buy-in to the shape of the agreement that we have to facilitate the implementation, which is, as we've heard, very much a private sector driven process in terms of the practical aspects of trading that we're discussing, of course, facilitated by governments. So it's, I think it raises those issues, you know, as you speak. I wanted to just turn to the chat, because there's a very interesting, in the Q&A, some very interesting points that are being raised. And I wanted to just reflect on some of them. In the chat, for example, there are some resources and ideas that are being put out to panelists, but there are also some interesting comments. I see one, for example, from Dr. Mike Matsebula, who is basically putting forward the idea that corruption is one of the major impeding factors for intra-African trade. And so the question is there a way in which this could be included as one of the expectations? What kind of process would be put in place to eliminate corruption? We also have Sylvia Solomon, who is putting out some comments about the challenges related to SMEs, that of funding, the access to technological innovations for SMEs, and so on. So I would like us to, you know, to basically turn our discussion to taking on board some of these questions, because, or comments that are coming from the audience, so that we can get the reaction of our panelists. And at this juncture, I also want to just inform you that we have a distinguished panelist who was looking forward to joining us, even though it may be brief, and that is Mr. Victor Lima. He is unfortunately held up in a meeting that he cannot excuse himself from at this moment, but as soon as he is available, he will definitely join this conversation, hopefully before we conclude in the next 30 minutes. So I would like to maybe, let's take this question about corruption, and you know, and what would any of the panelists want to respond to some of those issues, the challenges that they are facing? What, you know, I think transparency and predictability has of course been mentioned earlier on in our discussion. How critical is this issue to be placed firmly on the agenda, and so that it can be addressed as part of the AfCFTA implementation? Any panelist who wants to come in? I just want to keep it open for your comments. And I see it.
Okay, it's Valentina here.
Yes, please.
I'll try. Yes. I guess with corruption, the main thing is about reducing the human touch points, and also ensuring that there's transparency of information and processes, and that there are really strict penal measures for those who fall foul of the law. Now, technology is one of those things that can help reduce the human touch points. So as much as possible, where processes can be automated, such that processes cannot be altered or bypassed, and also having audit trails of particular transactions, so that even if it does occur after the event, in customs you have post-clearance audits, which is still relevant after so many years after a transaction. So even though someone might be able to go through, there still should be audit trails in place to ensure that culprits can be brought to book. So technology is one of the key areas that I believe can help reduce corruption in our processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Valentina. I also wondered if we have anybody. I see that we have a comment And a question from Alistair Tempest about payment for cross-border sales, whether these are online or offline. And he would like to hear the panel's views on what can be done to basically ensure the compatibility of various payment gateways that are available on the continent. And should the AfCFTA deal with these as non-tariff barriers? I'm not sure which panelists would like to respond. He didn't direct the question to anybody, but it's open. Anyone who wants to come in, please do.
Hi, Treasurer. This is Monica. Wanted to answer actually your previous point about SME financing, if I could pull you back to that.
Please. Yes, please go ahead.
Very important point, particularly us being in the COVID period. It's a very critical point for the growth of many SMEs, particularly SMEs which are run by women, actually. What COVID has done is really shaken the infrastructure which is available for financing for SMEs. As you know, in the best of times, it's very difficult for women-run businesses to access financing in the currency they need, in the amounts they need, and when they need it. And that's in the very best of times. So in a crisis like this, what we have seen is a lot of our usual social impact funds or bankers being quite a little bit more nervous about lending to SMEs. And that actually shakes the very fundamentals about whether or not we'll then be an active player in the rollout of CFTA, because really you really need to be able to fund working capital and CapEx at a reasonable cost in order for you to scale. And speaking here in Zambia, where if you walk in the bank today, you are likely to borrow in Zambian kwacha at over 30%, and it has to be fully secured at 1.2%. It is very expensive. I mean, you have to be doing something amazing to pay back that debt without default. And this is something which has to be talked about. I mean, I actually am in several webinars and panels about speaking about ensuring that capital inflows continue to flow, because you then take away the gains that we have made over the past few years, particularly for women-run and owned businesses, who are just now beginning to grow and scale, understand their own market, and begin to see how they can formally export to other markets. And then you take the rug underneath their feet by making it very difficult now to actually finance their businesses. And we do understand the world is in crisis, but this should continue to be a priority. We really need to look at other innovative ways to finance these businesses, particularly if we're focused on particular sectors. If it's a priority, if that you're in the agribusiness sectors, we really need to see who we can work with. Is it banks? Is it pension funds? Is it certain social impact funds? Are they guarantee mechanisms? Is it working with Africa Exim for certain things? But we really need to also begin to be really innovative, particularly if we really want to really draw in SMEs to be effective and really take advantage of the CFTA. So I think that's my point on that. And I challenge bankers all the time. I think they don't particularly like me, but bankers are not your friend when you're small and you're really struggling. I mean, they will give you all the cash that you want when you're a big multinational and have a parent, but very different when you're an SME. And we really need to change that. So I think that's my comment on that question.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving your perspective on this. I had just raised the point about payments, for cross-border sales and so on. I think we also learned this morning that Africa Exim Bank is preparing to roll out a Pan-African payments and settlement system. There's certainly a lot of activity happening in this area. What are the views of the panelists on the question Alistair has raised on issues of compatibilities, the issue of the rules on holding foreign currencies? How do we deal with these challenges? Basically, any ideas from the panel are welcome.
If I can again chime in here, I think it's very welcome to hear that the Africa Exim are leading this. It is one of the key issues we deal with on a daily basis about how to get paid in the currency we want. And thankfully here in Zambia, we don't have FX controls or restrictions per se, but you can imagine in other currencies where it's really quite a strict, regulation of how goods and services are paid for. But I think it's important because it's one of the key issues that you want to understand, and has to be clear, very transparent. I mean, you find it very easy for you here in Africa to buy a product on Amazon, but very hard to pay for something in a neighboring country because it's also very costly. If you speak to your bank and you want to do a bank transfer, you're probably going to pay between 5 to 10% of the value of your transaction goes to the bank. And those fees really need to come down, particularly, I mean, you're using an online e-commerce mechanism. We really would, I mean, us as the private sector would be looking for not only just payment system, but also things around guarantees. I mean, what I've heard a lot of is, people want to see the goods in their country, be able to inspect them, that they're good, they're fit for service before they pay for the good. But I, as a seller, I'm looking for to make sure that I'm actually protected, and this person won't just sort of not answer my calls. So we were looking for some innovation, some kind of, I suppose it's an LC, but better, a lot more innovation around guarantees and letters of credit, that kind of nature. But also the cost of it needs to come down in order for us to really be competitive.
Thank you very much for stepping in to answer that question. I also see a question from Adam Abdelal. Basically, the question says, discussions on the African Business Council are currently underway. What do you think should be some of the non-traditional activities of ABC? In other words, I guess it's just to get your views on a platform for engagement at the policy level by the private sector. Are there any comments in terms of how the organized private sector voice on the continent could be useful in the process of moving the AfCFTA process forward, I presume in the negotiations and implementation stages? If there are any comments on this, it would be very interesting from any panelist.
So it's Valentina here. So
yes,
in terms of mobilizing at the national level and mobilizing businesses, ICC has the national committees which are present in the countries, and also the chambers of commerce. And so we need to find a way of ensuring that businesses are mobilized to be able to input not only into the policy itself, but also the implementation and the monitoring of it. So I'm very sure that in the coming days, there should be further engagements to ensure that mobilized groups are included in the discussions and the implementation, as well as post-implementation on the monitoring and evaluation aspect, because this is key, because business is a critical actor to the entire process. So I'm sure that in the coming days, in all the deliberations, I haven't quite heard the amplified voice of businesses, but I'm sure post this conference, we should see more involvement from the business sector. Thank you.
Maybe I would add one or two comments on what has been said so far. Such initiative exists already, and we see emerging new initiatives where businessmen towards the continents are getting together, trying to, let's say, identify what would be the business opportunities that would come out of the CFTA. We've witnessed many initiatives. One of them is our organizations, because today we have more than 45 countries represented, and similar to that, we have on the port side, we have the majority of the African ports together are working together on, let's say, on a task force, and the main discussions today is around the CFTA challenges. There are also trade unions, I mean, the one that belongs to countries, and they are trying to harmonize somehow the standard and the way of doing business. So all these are very good news to us, because working together and will lead to create what we are looking at, which is complementarity between countries. And this would make us stronger and stronger, that's for sure.
Thank you very much for stepping in. I just wanted to take the opportunity to raise a question relating to AfCFTA implementation. And it's just a reminder for all of us that Not all the countries have signed. In fact, just one is still to sign. And then also a number of countries are yet to ratify the agreement. I think we all understand that as this is a treaty with binding obligations, we're really talking about state parties, the governments that have actually committed themselves to participate in the implementation process. I would like to hear from the private sector perspective whether you are monitoring which countries are ratifying, and what are your views about how tangible is this African market actually going to be if we have a map that shows different countries in different parts of the continent ratifying at different speeds? What is that something that strikes you as a challenge and or problematic, or do you believe that it is something that cannot be avoided and we will just have to have stakeholders share information in terms of moving forward? I think there's also this aspect of the parallelism, I think, that was raised, that we're going to have different free trade agreements that are operating in tandem with the AfCFTA in the countries that have ratified. I would like to hear what is the private sector view on this emerging situation. If you had a voice in terms of, and you do now because we have an audience with policymakers, what advice would you give to assist and somehow make the implementation process somewhat more manageable? So I would like to ask, the different panelists, our panelists, to respond to this question. Does anybody want to take it up?
I will try. I mean, I come from Zambia, and from what I understand is that we are actually waiting for the treaty to be ratified. So we did sign it, but from what I understand, and I stand to be corrected, and I think that is the key to, I think people are really trying to ask the same questions you're asking. Will it help? What is it trying to solve? What was the problem around our regional trade groupings? Because Zambia is in both SADC as well as COMESA. How can we, use this new treaty to better that? There has been some engagement so far with policymakers and business sector, but actually in the last few months, I think it's been rather quiet. That could also be because of COVID, I guess. But I think I would be concerned, just what you said, if we have a sort of a polka dot continent where some countries have still not ratified and are not implementing the CFTA as they should, and it means it will slow down the implementation, but I think it's expected. It's such a bold and optimistic move that we also need to give ourselves actually practical timelines in which implementation is to come into effect. I think what is good, you have seen some of the regional groupings working to some extent quite well, not without their challenges, but I think that a lot can be learned from our experiences there and how long it perhaps took for all the countries to ratify those treaties. But I think I can tell you as private sector, we will be disappointed if after all this work, 3 years from now, we're still having discussions about countries which are trying to ratify and implement the CFTA.
Thank you very much, Monica. Does anyone else want to come in on this? Because there's still some more issues coming up in our Q&A. Does anybody want to deal with this, or we can move on to another? Yes, please, Ahmed, come in.
Maybe one little comment. What the private sector is looking for is competitiveness. And competitiveness to tap into a new market, getting new business opportunities, working in somehow safe and business-friendly environment, and of course dealing with businesses in the way that they can improve their business, their businesses. So the CFTA commitment should address those requirements. And with regards to, let's say, the differences in terms of interpretation, I mean, locally, what countries are considering when countries are considering the CFTA implementation as an instrument to leverage their activities, and some countries sometimes they consider the CFTA as a threat. So that's why the implementations in some countries may take a longer time. But from the private sector perspective, we definitely believe that CFTA is an opportunity. It's a new business, new business for the companies, rather the small one, the medium-sized one, and the large ones. And the CFTA will definitely bring more competitiveness to our businesses.
Thank you very much. I would like to raise another point that, has not come up in our conversation, and we are heading towards the conclusion of this session. And it is striking that oftentimes when we're talking about the private sector, there's a huge demographic that comes in, but comes in last, and that is the youth. So I would, so the question that's been raised by Mlungisi is, how do we address the marginal place of youth and informal enterprises from the advocacy organs like chambers of commerce and state policy making, particularly startups that are key to growth in the continent? I think we have we've had a very strong, private sector voice in this conversation. But I would like you to respond. What are your organizations doing to make sure that we have the participation and involvement of youth, entrepreneurs and leaders in their own right to be part of shaping the implementation of the AfCFTA?
So this is Valentina. I'll speak from the ICC perspective. And we find entrepreneurs play a really key role in Africa's economic growth. If we look at statistics, 80% of employment in most countries is actually created by the SMEs. And then we also have the micro SMEs. And particularly since COVID, we found out this group has been the most affected. I mean, even without COVID, SMEs and entrepreneurs and startups tend to have higher failure rates than other organizations. And therefore, we have to be very deliberate with the interventions that are put in place for the youth. And if we look at statistics, Africa already makes up about 17% of the population. But in about 10 or so years, we're going to be making up a sizable number of the population, with the youth being at the forefront. So to ensure that we have our vibrant youth engaged, within ICC, we have the centers of entrepreneurship that are opening up. We should be having a key announcement tomorrow around that, with deliberate interventions and funding put in place to ensure that entrepreneurs are supported, not just during the COVID period, but also after COVID. So not just on the entrepreneurship aspect, but also creating employment and supporting with startups, having investor maps, and ensuring that we can have pitching competitions, matching competitions, deliberately directed and targeted to the SMEs and the youth and the entrepreneurs. So in the coming days, we should have some quite exciting announcements. We already have programs in place. As I mentioned in my earlier deliberation, we have the SOS campaign, which is the Save Our SMEs. So there are a number of capacity building tools, there are a number of free capacity building and educational tools already available online. So I'll ask participants to go onto the ICCWO site. There are also so many other partners. And there's a whole call of togetherness to ensure that multinationals come together. And there are quite a number of multinationals who have committed to a facility. And several such programs exist to ensure that together we actually come out better post-COVID and beyond. So I think this is a really key area, because with the population boom, this is the youth as an area that we really need to focus on, and entrepreneurships and startup. So we look forward to engaging further at the national committees. And as I mentioned, there are other organizations that are pooling resources together so that we can achieve almost immediate gains after the rollout of the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing what you're doing in this area. And I think that this is definitely an important area that needs continued attention, as you've said, from all the different organizations. And I know many efforts are being made across the continent. I think sometimes it is just a challenge to be able to follow what is happening. And I think there are issues really about how that youth entrepreneurship perspective gets coordinated and channeled into platforms so that it may be heard. But I'm aware that there are some vibrant organizations that are doing a good job to try to raise this issue. Now, as we are moving towards the end of our session, I thought it might be useful to just, at this point, just first of all, to thank all the panelists for their engagements that we have had this afternoon on a number of important aspects of implementation. And I want to just make a few observations really by way of summary, what are the things that I've learned and that, that we can take away from this session. I also want to appreciate the, the chat and the communication, the questions that have been raised, that unfortunately, some of which we have not been able to deal with exhaustively due to limited time, but I want to just indicate that they are certainly still going to be taken care of by the tralac team. And so we thank you for having raised those questions and comments as well. As we have been deliberating on this panel, I just want to say that it has been really, I think, very interesting to hear basically what I hear is, first of all, convergence around the importance of making sure that this agreement, yes, everybody acknowledges it is ambitious, there's still a lot going on, but the fact that there's a convergence about the importance of implementation, and I think the benefits that can be seen by the different stakeholders in terms of the impact we can reap. I want to also say that there've been a number of, there's been a reality check on some of the challenges that are still there that we need to confront, which one understands will be part of the implementation journey. And our panel, which has been really mostly oriented coming from the private sector perspective, but also looking at policy issues, has also, I think, brought some key sort of frameworks and thinking around what could be the performance benchmarks for this African continental free trade area. And I think for the institutions that are leading the implementation process, such as the AfCFTA Secretariat, and of course, other bodies that are tracking this, I think it's a very interesting call to maybe strengthen the interrogation of what the success looks like, what are the elements, and how do we make sure that in that monitoring and evaluation process, we have all the stakeholders that are concerned part of the conversation and able to make their contributions. I think the other takeaway I take from this session is that governments clearly have the obligations to implement the agreement, but I think there is a great deal of potential that they can reap in harnessing and working with different actors that are there in the space, whether they are the special economic zones, whether they are chambers of commerce, whether they are organizations of small or large businesses. And indeed, I think, and also international organizations that are playing a major role in supporting the AfCFTA move forward. So I think that it is really finding the mechanism and the platform for us to harness this goodwill. I heard earlier the statement about political will, and I think I always want to say it is also about commitment, really, by all the actors to make this work. And I definitely felt that positive energy, that there is that willingness. We just have to find the spaces, and some are opening up. And this indeed, in fact, Tralac has offered a very wonderful opportunity here to engage on the issues that are very pertinent to the implementation process as we go forward. So my last word, as I just have 1 minute, is just to thank you for being a part of this event. And I certainly want to thank you for tuning in and remaining with us till the end. Please do not sign off, because right now we're going to have some closing remarks from Tralac, basically led by our chairperson and also the CEO of Tralac. So before we hand over, please can we give a round of applause to our excellent panel. And I want to thank you so much for having come to share your deep knowledge and insights and perspectives on what is a broad-ranging topic, but I think you have found a way to give us some food for thought as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Treasure.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Treasure, Monica, Valentina, and Ahmed for a really interesting conversation, and also to all our participants who've been posting very interesting questions and comments. As we noted earlier, we are going to be collating all of those. And if we haven't responded to all of them, we will find a way of getting some answers for you and posting those in the newsletter, which we'll send out at the end of this week. It's now my great pleasure to hand over to the chair of the Tralac board, Mr. George Lipimile, to deliver closing remarks. Thank you very much, George.
Thank you very much, Trudy, and thank you very much, Treasure. Honorable Minister Alan Clemartin, Minister of Trade and Industry in Ghana, distinguished members of the board of Tralac, Tralac Associates and the alumni, His Excellency Ambassador Albert Muchanga, Commissioner for Trade and Industry, African Union Commission, His Excellency Ambassador Wakele Mene, Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, His Excellency Ambassador Alan Hoof, Deputy Director General, World Trade Organization. May I simply say all the distinguished participants. I would like to take this opportunity to once again thank Your Excellencies for attending the 2020 Tralac Annual Conference and for your fruitful interaction with us over the past 2 days. Your contributions made our discussion more intense, and this was demonstrated by the enthusiasm of the discussions between the audience and the speakers over the past 2 days. This also bears testimony to the interest and commitment of the African governments to a continental market that uplifts the livelihood of its citizens. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, it is now evident that the African Continental Free Trade Area approaches businesses throughout the African continent and beyond would embrace themselves to face new challenges and grasp new opportunities in an expanded continental market. It is also evident that a transformation is already taking place on our continent as companies have to adapt to new conditions and the emerging reality of a single market of over 1.3 billion consumers with a significant youthful population and growing middle class and a combined gross domestic product of $3.4 trillion US. At the same time, the continent integration agenda has been negatively affected by the COVID-19. Despite the challenges that the pandemic has brought, It has also taught us new ways of doing business. Our discussion over the past 2 days have covered a number of important issues, including the benefits of market integration to our countries in terms of sustainable and inclusive growth. We've heard how the African Continental Free Trade Area has the potential to increase employment opportunities and incomes, helping to expand opportunities for all Africans. According to a World Bank study, the African Continental Free Trade Area is expected to lift around 68 million people out of moderate poverty and make African countries more competitive. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement has the potential to reach share markets and economies across by the region, leading to the creation of new industries and the expansion of key sectors. We've also appreciated the key milestones of the African Continental Free Trade Area negotiations, where we have registered successes and the challenges that we must confront to make it effective. While COVID-19 has derailed the negotiations on the agreement, it is important that the member states continue to show their commitment to the agreement. We don't need political will, as political will is not stable, but what we require is commitment by our governments. Successful implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area would help cushion the negative effects of COVID-19. The pandemic has caused major disruption to trade across the continent, including in critical goods such as medical supplies and food. By increasing regional trade, lowering trade costs, and streamlining border procedures, full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area will help African governments increase their resilience in the face of future economic shocks and help to usher in the kinds of deep reforms that are necessary for long-term growth. We also head on the challenges facing multilateral trade organizations. The participants raised valid concerns on the need to ensure the operation of a rule-based framework of integration that is necessary for promoting investment and trade. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we close our discussions, it is worth observing that at this vital formative period of the African Continental Free Trade Area, all stakeholders must have adequate information in order to maximize their prospects in an economically integrated Africa. They must know about the present legal position, the changes that are taking place, and developments which are likely to occur in the foreseeable future. I've been greatly encouraged by the recent signs that tralac and other think tanks on the continent are alive to the possibilities and responding to the challenges. Allow me also to thank our development partners for their continued support, GIZ, which has sponsored the annual conference, and also CEDA and the USAID that supports tralac's work. We appreciate the trust they have in tralac to implement its program across the 3 pillars, namely research, training, and policy dialogue, focusing on Africa's trade and integration agenda. Finally, let me thank all the moderators and the panelists who have shared important insights on the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Thank you all once again for availing yourselves to attending this conference, and we look forward to seeing you soon in future events and interactions. Stay safe, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George, for those closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, from the tralac team, it just remains for us to thank you all, to thank our board members, advisory board members, our development partners, our distinguished keynote speakers, moderators, panelists, and you, the participants, who have made this an extremely interesting and productive 2 days conversation. Before I leave you, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to just give you a little bit of a taste of what we do after an annual conference. This is important to inform our future work program, and we take away 4 key focus areas. Under the broad banner of COVID and other pandemics and challenges, for trade governance. These are important areas of work for the African Continental Free Trade Area, Africa's trade and integration agenda, but for multilateral trade governance too. The first is that we are interdependent, that we will not, this pandemic will not be the last that we face collectively. And therefore, what we do need to recognize is the importance of multilateral and collective governance solutions. Reform of the WTO, as we heard from Alan Wolf, is absolutely critical. Africa needs to be committed and engaged in that conversation to promote a new governance regime for the 21st century. Second area of focus we will take forward, ladies and gentlemen, is climate issues. What COVID has shown us is that a reduction in carbon emissions is possible. What are we going to do in terms of the recovery, reconstruction, and transformation of our economies? As a recent Economist article pointed out, oil powered the 20th century economy. What are we going to do in the 21st century? We have to reckon with the fact that the consumers of energy in the 20th century will now be the producers of energy. It will be a new reality for policymakers and regulators and for trade governance as far as energy and energy-related services are concerned. It's an extremely important for our sustainable future. The second area is digital economy solutions, ladies and gentlemen. The digital economy is not a small track alongside other economic activities. It is the economy in the 21st century. It's impossible to think of any trade transaction, for example, that does not involve some digital aspect, whether it be a WhatsApp call or an email. The digital economy is with us. It is a reality, and we need to think about how we shape appropriate governance instruments, how we change the way we work, as we've seen some of our panelists earlier refer to working on platforms. This is our first digital annual conference. It will definitely not be the last. And finally, we've seen a focus on productive capacity development during the COVID era, where we've seen challenges of food security, access to pharmaceutical products and other medical supplies. For the African continent, ladies and gentlemen, if the AfCFTA is to deliver what we expect from it, we have to increase our capacity to produce tradable goods and services competitively. This means not only focusing on core industrial activities, but it does require a focus on those sectors. But it requires a focus economy-wide, improving capacity in agriculture, productivity, the range of food that we produce. And it's been very interesting to hear from Monica Musonda what a small-scale food processing operation in a least developed country is doing to increase food security. What do we need to do in terms of fostering new relationships between trade and industrial policy, enhancing linkages across the economy, leveraging services to enhance competitiveness, not only as we trade with ourselves, amongst ourselves on the continent, but also as we engage in the 21st century on more competitive terms with our global economic partners. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll keep you posted. We will be in contact before the end of the week with a newsletter reporting on this discussion of the annual conference, and we look forward to meet again, virtually or in person. Thank you so much again from all of us at the Tralac office. Stay safe, and we look forward to meeting you.